I could have forgiven her. But I didn't want to. Because forgiveness, when it's handed out as charity, doesn't change anything in life. By the time I carried the second tray of cookies to the table, it had begun to snow. My breath misted slightly in the cold kitchen air, and the old radiator behind me gave a tired groan as it struggled to warm the room. Outside, the sky was low and gray, casting pale blue shadows on the floor. I wiped my flour-covered hands on the edge of a dish towel and lit the first candle on the table, pine-scented. Then cinnamon. Then vanilla. Her favorites. It was the same trio every year. I wasn't sure why I was doing this again. Maybe it was routine. Maybe it was denial. Or maybe, stupidly, it was hope. The house was still. Too still. No music. No footsteps. No quiet sounds from the neighbors next door. Just the soft, flickering breath of candles and the sound of my own breathing. I'd been preparing for this evening all week. It was my mother's birthday, not a holiday anyone else would cancel plans for, but it mattered to me. It always had. Since I was 12, I'd made it a tradition to plan something for her. She never asked for anything, not directly, but the clues were always there. A passing comment about how no one ever makes chocolate orange cake the way she likes it. A sigh as she flipped through old photo albums, saying, "We used to be a real family then, remember?" I remembered. I always remembered. That's why I was up before the sun, baking from scratch. Why I'd taken the day off work. Why I cleaned the apartment from top to bottom, lit the candles, and arranged everything so carefully it almost hurt. The gifts were wrapped in paper I'd saved from last year. Not expensive, but chosen with a kind of desperate precision, gloves, because she's always cold. A second-hand book I'd found with her favorite author's name on the spine. A tiny glass jar of sea salt from a place she once pointed at through a store window and said, "Maybe someday." I'd even ironed the linen napkins. Who does that for a weekday dinner? Someone's still hoping to be seen. It was 6 in the evening when my phone buzzed. Not a call. Just a message. I wiped my hands on the towel again, sugar still clinging to my fingertips, and reached for the phone without thinking. "Mom, hey sweetheart. Don't stress. David decided to do something small at his place. It's just easier that way. No need to bring anything. Rest tonight. You've done enough." I read it twice. Then again. Just to be sure. There was no punctuation after sweetheart. Just a carefully passive tone, one I knew too well. I could hear her voice in my head as I read it light, almost breezy, like none of it mattered. David decided. Not we. Not wish you were coming too. Just him. Always him. I put the phone down. The snow outside was falling heavier now, blanketing the balcony railing like someone gently tucking in the world. I stared at it, my fingers curled loosely around the edge of the counter. The table was set. The candles were lit. The food was still warm. And I was uninvited. Not directly. Not cruelly. Just softly, like being ushered out of a photo frame without anyone noticing. And the worst part? This wasn't the first time. How many times had I done this? Put together a meal, bought gifts, poured myself into the details, only to be overlooked, replaced, or dismissed. Birthdays, graduations, dinners, holidays. The pattern never changed. I planned. I showed up. They didn't. Or if they did, it was with last-minute guests and distracted smiles. David would breeze in late, bring a friend, take the biggest piece of cake. And somehow he was always the favorite. The star. The easy one to love. Me? I was responsible. Mature. Reliable. Which I've learned are all just words people use when they want to praise you without getting close. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I didn't even reply to the message. Instead, I blew out the candles one by one. The smell of pine and cinnamon lingered in the air, clinging like a memory I didn't ask for. The light dimmed. The house folded back into silence. I folded the napkins, smoothed them carefully, and placed them back in the drawer. Unplugged the string lights. gathered the gifts and set them on the edge of my bed like lost luggage that never made it to its destination. And then I just sat there in the quiet. I didn't feel angry. Not yet. I felt blank. Like someone had emptied me out without warning. Like I'd built something for years, a bridge, a ritual, a reason, and someone had quietly walked around it, choosing a shorter path. A memory came back to me. I was 8 years old, sitting at the kitchen table. I'd drawn a picture with crayons, a crooked heart with 3 stick figures inside. Me, David, and our mother. I remember holding it up to her when she walked through the door, her coat still on. She glanced at it, barely, then smiled and said, "Cute, honey. But why don't you draw something real next time? Like a house. Or a dog." Just like that, the heart meant nothing. I remember folding the paper quietly and not showing her my drawings again for a long time. That's the kind of thing people forget, they say. But I remembered. It was the beginning of a long lesson. Love wasn't free. It had to be earned. And even then, it might not be returned. I sat with a blanket wrapped around my legs, holding a mug of tea that had gone cold without me noticing. The TV was on mute, just background light now. I stared at my phone screen. The message still waited there like an open door I no longer wanted to walk through. I could have replied, said something polite, said, "Okay, maybe next time." But I didn't want to. Because for the first time, I saw it clearly, how many times I'd swallowed the same hurt just to keep the illusion of closeness alive. How many times I'd told myself that it didn't matter. It did matter. It always mattered. But I was the one who had to pretend it didn't. I thought about driving over anyway. Just showing up. Pretending the message never came. That's what I used to do. But tonight, I couldn't. Not because I was trying to make a point. Not to punish anyone. Because I was tired. Deeply tired. Of earning affection like it was a job interview. Of being told I was loved only when I was useful. Of being the one who remembers everything while everyone else forgot me. And somewhere in that silence, that long, aching silence, I felt something shift. Not bitterness. Not rage. Just release. A quiet decision. I poured myself a glass of wine, took a cookie off the tray, and sat by the window. The snow outside looked softer now. Less like a threat, more like a veil between me and the noise I used to chase. I lifted my glass slightly toward the window. To the uninvited, I whispered. And for the first time, I didn't feel left out. I felt free. It's strange, realizing you were never in the family portrait. Just the one who held the frame still. There wasn't a dramatic breakdown. No outburst. No slamming of doors or shattered plates. Just quiet. A vast, echoing quiet that felt like a second skin. The snow kept falling outside, soft and determined, covering everything: rooftops, branches, footprints, intentions. I sat there for a long time, staring into the silence I had once filled with so much effort. Light flickered across the window from a neighbor's TV. Somewhere in the building, someone laughed. The sound rose and faded like a wave crashing against glass. Inside me, something was sinking. And it wasn't just about tonight. It wasn't about the uninvitation, not really. That was only the match. The room had been full of smoke for years. It started in childhood. Not with anything obvious. Not with shouting or slammed cupboards. My mother wasn't cruel, at least not in the traditional sense. She didn't raise her voice or forget to feed us. No, she did something subtler. Something softer. She measured her affection by performance. When David forgot a birthday or left his homework undone, she would sigh and say, "Boys are like that." Then tousle his hair, like it was charming. When I got a B instead of an A, she would say, "I just know you can do better. You're the smart one." It sounded like a compliment, the kind designed to make you stand up straighter, to try harder. But what it really meant was, try harder or disappear. And so I tried. I cleaned. I studied. I memorized her moods like other kids memorized song lyrics. I made myself useful, predictable, careful. When David scraped his knee, I got the bandages. When Mom was sad, I made tea. When guests came, I stayed quiet unless spoken to. By the time I was a teenager, I knew how to fold laundry exactly how she liked it. I had learned which silence meant fatigue and which one meant irritation. I could tell by the way she set her purse down whether she wanted space or comfort. She never asked. I just knew. But the more I gave, the less she seemed to see me. It was like being the invisible scaffolding of a house, necessary but never praised. David, on the other hand, was fireworks. Every mediocre achievement of his became an event. A new haircut? So handsome. Passing a single class he nearly failed? We're just so proud you pulled through. I graduated top of my class. She nodded. Well, of course you did. No hugs. No tears. Just inevitability. Like she expected excellence from me the way one expects gravity, invisible, reliable, never needing things. And I told myself I didn't need it, that I was above craving recognition. But I did. Of course I did. And sitting there, alone with the unopened wine and the untouched food, it hit me harder than I expected. I had spent my entire life performing for someone who never clapped. The memories came uninvited. Not like a flood, more like drips from a leaking faucet. Slow, persistent, impossible to ignore. I was 13, the night of David's birthday party. He'd forgotten to invite half his friends, so I spent the evening calling them myself. I decorated the cake, cleaned up the mess after. When everyone left, Mom looked at him with tears in her eyes and whispered, "This is what happiness looks like." She never said that to me. I was 17, the day I got accepted to a university she didn't think I'd get into. I showed her the letter, heart pounding, breath held. She looked at it for 2 seconds, then said, "And how will you afford it?" Not congratulations. Not I'm proud of you. Just logistics. I was 24, and she called crying because David's girlfriend had left him. She asked me to go check on him, even though I had the flu. I went anyway. She never asked how I was feeling. She never asked me anything. I was the listener, the fixer, the note-taker, the background. People say it's a gift to be dependable. But I've learned that being dependable often means being forgotten. It took me years to notice the pattern, that David was loved just because, while I was loved when useful. When I confronted her once, gently, cautiously, she laughed. "Don't be dramatic," she said, brushing it off like lint from her sleeve. "You always take things too personally. I treat you the way I do because I trust you to handle it." That sentence carved something out of me I never fully recovered from. Because what it meant was this: I'm harder on you because you can take it. Not because I love you more. Not because I believe in you. But because I know you won't leave even if I make it unbearable. It's the kind of logic that sounds like a compliment until you see the bruises it leaves. Even now, years later, that logic haunts me. I never left because I didn't know I could. Not physically, I moved out as soon as I could, but emotionally. I was still trapped in that invisible contract. You will be the strong one, and in return, we will let you exist on the margins. I thought if I gave enough, they'd eventually let me in. But giving wasn't the key. It was the lock. I looked around my apartment, still dim from the candles I'd blown out earlier. Everything I had prepared sat untouched, like a dinner laid out for ghosts. The cinnamon scent had faded. The warmth had drained. It felt like a stage after the actors have left, all the props still in place, but no audience, no applause, no meaning. That's when I realized something painful but clear. I wasn't excluded from the family. I was never fully in it. At least, not in the way I needed to be. I was the glue, the middle piece, the person who remembered birthdays, organized gifts, filled in the silences when conversations dropped. They needed me when things broke, but not when things worked. Because when things worked, they didn't notice I was there. I walked to the kitchen and poured the wine down the sink. Not out of spite, just practicality. I didn't want it anymore. I picked up the cake I had spent hours making and placed it gently into containers for the freezer. I wasn't going to throw it away. I'd eat it slowly, quietly, over the next week, like letting go in spoonfuls. And as I moved through my apartment, turning off lights, folding blankets, something settled in my chest. Not a plan, not revenge, just a knowing that maybe, just maybe, I didn't have to keep proving my worth to people who only saw me when I was useful. Maybe love wasn't supposed to be earned. Maybe presence alone should be enough. And maybe I had been enough this whole time, but they never learned how to love someone they couldn't control. I stood by the window again. The snow hadn't stopped. It drifted slowly, like it had nowhere else to be. The whole street looked hushed, softened by white. There was something beautiful about it. Something pure. Not in a fairy tale way, more in a quiet, unbothered way. The kind of beauty that doesn't ask for attention. I felt a strange comfort watching it fall. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was waiting to be invited into something. I was already here, in my own space, in my own story. And though part of me still longed to be seen, to be chosen without needing to prove anything, another part of me was learning the power of not waiting anymore. Some families are made of history, others are made of habit. But some, like mine, are made of performance. And I'm done being the understudy in a play I never wanted to be in. Not every act of love is loud, and not every exit is marked by a door slamming shut. Sometimes, you simply stop holding the rope. The next morning came without ceremony. No bright revelation. No sudden clarity. Just the soft gray light of a winter dawn pushing through the curtains. My body felt heavier than usual, like I'd borrowed someone else's weight in the night. My mind was quiet, not empty, but still, like the air after a storm you didn't know had passed. I didn't check my phone. Not out of defiance, I simply didn't want to. There were probably messages by now. Maybe from David. Maybe even from my mother. Something passive, something that feigned warmth but rang hollow. A just checking in or a hope you're okay without the weight of meaning behind it. Words that danced around the truth like it had teeth. But I didn't open anything. Instead, I stood at the window with my mug of coffee, watching the snow soften the world into silence. The street was nearly empty, save for a couple walking slowly, bundled tightly into coats. Their footprints disappeared behind them with each step. No trail left. No evidence. I envied that a little. To walk forward without being haunted by the steps behind. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the soft fatigue in my bones. Maybe it was that final message, you've done enough. Whatever it was, something in me clicked. Not dramatically. Not loudly. Just quietly. And I began to stop. That same morning, I opened my banking app and scrolled through the list of auto payments. There they were, like shadows. The phone plan I paid for temporarily 2 years ago still in David's name. The monthly grocery transfer to my mother's account. The utilities I covered at the old house, even though I hadn't lived there in 6 years. I stared at them for a moment. They weren't malicious. Just habits. Quiet debts I was never asked to forgive, only expected to carry. I tapped cancel on each one. One by one, like slowly loosening knots. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like oxygen. There's a kind of guilt that comes when you stop being what others need you to be. It doesn't shout. It whispers. What if they struggle without you? What if they don't understand? What if they say you changed? But the truth is, I didn't change. I just stopped shrinking. I just stopped making myself smaller so they could stretch out and be comfortable. Later that day, I opened the hallway closet. The one packed with forgotten things, extension cords, tools, receipts, extra towels. And boxes. Boxes of cards I had written but never sent. Gifts I bought just in case. Notes on paper I'd tucked away because they weren't the right moment yet. Most of them were for her. For my mother. Little things. Things that made me think of her. A scarf in her favorite shade of green. A candle that smelled like the lilacs that grew by her childhood home. A bookmark etched with the words, "You are already enough." She wouldn't have liked that one. Too sentimental, she would have said. Too dramatic. Still, I had kept it. hoping maybe someday the time would be right to give it to her. Now, standing in the quiet with the snow still falling, I finally understood. There was no right time, because the time had already passed. Because I had never really been giving these things to her, I had been offering them to a version of her that only existed in my imagination. A mother who would open them and see me. Not the effort. Not the usefulness. Me. I sat on the floor with the box beside me and didn't cry. I just began sorting through it, not as a daughter desperate to be seen, but as a woman slowly returning home to herself. By evening, I was ready. Not for a confrontation. Not for a speech. But for a decision. I wouldn't go to the next holiday dinner. I wouldn't respond to the group message I'd surely be added to last minute. I wouldn't play the role. Not this time. The image I had of the table, the long, crowded dining table in David's house, with mismatched chairs and paper napkins, didn't sting the way I thought it would. Not anymore. Because I had been there a dozen times before. And I remembered what it felt like. To sit there, smiling politely, passing dishes no one thanked me for preparing, listening to laughter that somehow never reached me. To be present in body, but absent in spirit. It had always felt like waiting outside a house in the cold, knocking gently, hoping someone would notice I was still on the porch. But now I didn't want to go inside. Not because I was angry, but because I was warm where I stood. That night, I deleted the family group chat from my favorites. I turned off notifications. I tucked the green scarf into a donation bag. And I made a small, quiet dinner just for myself. Simple. Soft. Not performative. I ate by the window with a book on my lap, candlelight dancing quietly beside me. And for the first time in years, the quiet didn't feel empty. It felt like mine. The next morning, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt like I'd left something behind. But instead of grief, it felt like a coat I had outgrown, heavy, itchy, no longer mine. I realized how often I'd measured my worth in invisible currency. How many years I had spent being the silent support beam in a house that never once asked me how I stayed standing. They never asked. And I never told. I had played the part so well that no one thought to look beneath it. But I was done playing. It's a strange thing, walking away without making a sound. There's no applause. No dramatic goodbye. Just the absence of noise. The absence of trying. And the first few steps feel unsteady. You almost want to turn back, not because you were happy there, but because being unseen had become so familiar that it masqueraded as comfort. But then you take one more step. And another. And the silence becomes something else entirely. Not loneliness. Freedom. I took the last box of letters, ones I'd written but never sent, and walked to the fireplace. One by one, I held each envelope over the flame, watching the paper curl and blacken. Not with anger. With reverence. Each letter had been written by a version of me who believed she could earn love through effort, through sacrifice, through loyalty that was never returned in full. I honored her, and then I let her go. The final one short, just a single line read, "I hope one day you notice the things I never said." I watched it disappear into smoke. And then, quietly, I made tea. They noticed quicker than I thought they would. 3 days after I canceled the auto payments, the first message arrived. Not a call, just a text. "David? Hey, random? Did you stop the bill payments for Mom's place?" No greeting. No punctuation. Just confusion wrapped in expectation. I didn't reply. 2 hours later, another message popped up. "Mom. Hey, sweetie, I think something went wrong with the utilities. Can you take a look when you have time?" Still soft. Still assuming. As if I were just a part of the system that sometimes glitched. Not a person. Not someone who could choose to stop. I let it sit. And I kept letting it sit. The silence spread like fog across a familiar path, soft, slow, impossible to ignore. It wasn't passive aggression. It wasn't revenge. It was simply absence. And absence, when it's new, feels like betrayal to those who depended on your constant presence. By the end of the week, the tone began to shift. "David, Why are you ignoring everyone? What's going on with you? Mom, it's very unlike you to act this way. I hope everything's okay. That one made me pause. I hope everything's okay. Funny how easily that sentence is used by people who never asked if anything was okay before. People who saw your exhaustion and called it strength. People who watched you carry too much and assumed it was your natural posture. They say they're worried when you stop, but not because they care about your well-being. They're worried because your silence is inconvenient. Because silence, when it's coming from the one who always fixes things, feels dangerous. I went through the days slowly, quietly. The world outside remained blanketed in snow. Cars moved slowly along the icy streets. Lights glowed from behind curtains in the evenings like small, soft promises. I kept to myself. Read more. Cooked less. Walked in the cold air until my fingers tingled. I began to realize how much space there was in my life once I stopped making space for everyone else. There was time. There was room. There was breath. And with each passing day, my guilt began to loosen its grip. Not vanish. Just loosen, because guilt is a kind of leash. One you sometimes hold yourself by. A week passed. Then the first real message came, the one meant to pull me back in. Mom, I don't know what we did to deserve this coldness from you. But this behavior is really hurtful. There it was. Not a question. A statement. I reread the line 3 times. This behavior. She never used that word on David. She never used that word on herself. But for me, there had always been a behavioral expectation, a role to play. The helper. The mature one. The responsible one. And anything outside of that role was seen as emotional mismanagement. I didn't respond. Not because I wanted her to hurt, but because I knew now I couldn't be heard unless I stopped speaking in the language of compliance. They never listened to my exhaustion when I wrapped it in politeness. They never saw my loneliness when I still smiled through it. Now I had changed the dialect. I was speaking with my absence. The voicemails came next. One from David, his voice strained, like he was trying not to sound annoyed. This isn't like you. Look, if you needed something, you should have just said it. Mom's been stressed. It's not fair to leave her guessing like this. That one made me laugh quietly to myself. I should have said something, as if I hadn't spent years saying things in every way I knew how. As if the meals, the gifts, the planning, the gentle reminders, the calls, the holidays, the effort hadn't all been forms of speech. But none of it had been heard. Because they weren't listening. They were benefiting. Mom, voicemail, I just feel like we're being punished. And I don't even know for what. The phrase sat on my chest like a weight. Being punished. I never set out to hurt anyone. But the truth is, when you stop over-functioning in a system that depended on you doing more than your share, it always feels like punishment to those who were comfortable. They don't see the balance returning. They see the imbalance slipping away. They see the help disappearing and call it cruelty. One night, I got up at 3 a.m. and stood by the window, watching the street below. A dog barked in the distance. Snowflakes fell steadily, lit up gold by the flickering street lamp. I had the urge to call her. Not to apologize, I had nothing left to apologize for. But maybe just to explain. To say, I didn't leave to hurt you. I left because staying was hurting me. But I knew how that conversation would go. She would redirect. Deny. Distract. Minimize. She wouldn't hear me. She would only hear that I had broken the pattern, and to her, the pattern had always felt like love. It was a strange kind of grief, this stage I was in. Not the grief of losing someone. The grief of realizing they were never fully yours to begin with. I thought of every time I had stood quietly at the edge of the family. Every time I was told, you're just more grounded. You've always been independent. As if that were praise. As if it weren't just a pretty way of saying, we rely on you more than we're willing to admit. Now that I had stopped, they didn't know where to place me. And their discomfort was growing. 2 weeks in, the messages changed tone again. David, we're having a New Year's thing. Figured you might want to come. No pressure. But the pressure was there, written between the lines. The unsaid message, we need you to come. We don't know how to do it without you. No one said that outright. They never would. But I could feel it. Like static under skin. Mom, you're still my daughter. No matter how upset you are. This family matters. Still my daughter. As if my silence had made me something else. As if speaking on my own terms meant I was distancing myself from more than just obligation. They didn't understand yet that it wasn't punishment. It was protection. I wasn't leaving them. I was returning to myself. I made no declarations. No long letters. No, let me explain. I had spent too many years trying to be understood by people who only valued me when I was useful. Now, I let them sit with the space I left behind. Because maybe silence was the only voice they would finally hear. I deleted the calendar reminders for everyone's birthdays. I removed the color-coded tabs I had once made for coordinating family gatherings. I unsubscribed from the quiet expectations that I would always show up. And with each small deletion, I felt more like myself. Not the version they sculpted. The one I had buried beneath obligation. The funny thing is, the world didn't end. The sky didn't fall. The family didn't shatter. But they did begin to crack. The kind of cracking that happens when a missing piece finally makes itself known. And in that absence, they began to realize that maybe I wasn't just support. I was structure. And now that I was gone, really gone, the imbalance tilted everything. It arrived on a Thursday. Just a plain white envelope with no return address. Handwritten. The kind of letter most people would toss aside without opening. But something about it made me pause. The handwriting was small, neat, a little old-fashioned. It looked familiar, though I couldn't say why. I opened it by the window, the morning light curling softly against the page. Inside was a short note. No greeting. No signature. You probably don't remember me. But when my husband passed away, you were the only person who knocked on my door and brought food. You didn't stay. You didn't say much. But I remember thinking, this is what kindness feels like. I heard you're not around them anymore. I hope you're okay. Some of us noticed you, even if they didn't. I stood there, fingers pressed to the edge of the page, reading it again. And again. Not because it was long, but because it landed in a place that had gone quiet for so long, I'd forgotten it was even there. I hadn't cried when I canceled the payments. I hadn't cried when they stopped calling. I hadn't cried when I spent the holidays alone, but I cried reading that letter. Not because it hurt, but because it didn't. Because it felt like confirmation of something I'd never dared to believe. That someone had seen me. Not for what I could give. Not for how reliable I was. But for who I was in a single, quiet moment. It wasn't a grand gesture. It was a small ripple, one I didn't even remember creating. But someone remembered. And somehow, that was enough. The next day, I found myself revisiting everything not with bitterness, but with a kind of calm clarity I didn't expect. I scrolled back through old photos, ones I hadn't deleted yet. Holidays. Birthdays. Gatherings. I looked at my own face in them. Smiling. Present. Helping. Always just slightly to the side, like a piece of furniture. Never the center. Never the celebrated one. But always the one holding everything in place. And I saw it now not with sadness, but with compassion. That girl, the one who tried so hard, gave so much, stayed so long, she wasn't weak. She was loyal. And brave. And exhausted. And now, finally, she was resting. I knew the family would reach out again. I knew the next wave of contact was coming. That letter had stirred something in me, and when things stir, they ripple. Sure enough, it began with a holiday card. No note inside. Just to Elena, from all of us. Tucked into the envelope was a photo. The family around the dinner table. David smiling. Mom at the head of the table. An empty chair beside her. My chair. They hadn't even cropped me out. They'd left it there. Like a placeholder. Like an invitation. Like a statement. Or maybe a question. 2 days later, the call came. Not David. Her. I let it ring. Watched the name on the screen as it blinked once, twice, 5 times. I didn't answer. Not because I was angry, but because I didn't owe an explanation anymore. 5 minutes later, a voicemail. I don't know what else to say to get through to you. I know things haven't always felt fair. I know I'm not perfect. But this silence it's hurtful. You used to care. I don't understand what changed. I listened once, then deleted it. Because I knew what changed. I did. A week later, a package arrived at my door. No name on the box, but the handwriting on the label told me everything I needed to know. Inside, a photo album, full of pictures I hadn't seen in years. Ones I'd taken, ones I'd printed. Pages of childhood, school days, birthdays. Me, always just off to the side. Holding cakes, wrapping gifts, cleaning up. On the last page, a photo I didn't remember. Just me, alone in the kitchen. Probably mid-laugh. Probably unaware the picture was being taken. Underneath, a caption in handwriting that didn't belong to me. We forgot to say thank you. That was it. No note. No apology. No phone number. Just the photo. And those 5 words. I closed the book gently, set it on the shelf, and didn't call back. Not out of malice. Out of clarity. Because sometimes people remember you when you're gone. But remembering isn't the same as changing. Spring came early that year. The snow melted slower than I expected, but the light shifted. Mornings stretched longer. Air moved differently. I started planting small things on my windowsill. Basil, mint, lavender. I liked watching something grow just because it was cared for. Not because it was expected. Not because it served a purpose. Just because it reminded me of what I was learning to do with myself. I went for walks without checking my phone. I cooked for myself without guilt. I stopped justifying what I did with my time. I stopped explaining my peace. There's a kind of power in quiet freedom, in not announcing your healing, in not performing your boundaries like a play. I didn't owe them a dramatic finale. The play was over, and I had walked off stage. Sometimes I wondered if they truly missed me or if they missed what I did for them. But then I let the question go, because it no longer mattered. I wasn't waiting to be chosen. I had already chosen myself. One night in late March, I lit a single candle, poured a glass of wine, and sat with the letter again, the one from the neighbor. The note that had broken something open. That small moment of grace from a quiet place in the past. And I wrote a letter in return. You were right. I didn't remember. But I'm so glad you did. Some people don't need a spotlight to see clearly. Thank you for seeing me in the quiet. I didn't send it. I didn't even have an address. But I placed it in the drawer beside my bed, because sometimes letters don't need to be delivered. Sometimes they just need to be written.